The sale of the effects of Amberley Grange was cried in the market town for a fortnight beforehand, and on the appointed morning the whole county came out to see it done. They came in gigs and farm carts, and on foot along the lane, and they stood about on the wet grass where, in better years, they had drunk Mr. Edmund Selby's punch, and danced under his windows until 2 in the morning, and they watched the bailiff's men carry the house out of doors piece by piece, and set it down in rows upon the turf. Everything had a number chalked upon it. That was the thing Honora Selby found she could not stop looking at. Not the rain coming grey over the beech woods, not the neighbours with their faces carefully arranged into sympathy, but the soft white figures scrawled on the wood itself. 41 on the long dining table where her mother had sat. 42 on the tall clock out of the hall that had counted every hour she had ever lived. A family may be stripped of a house by law and by paper, and by the quiet work of gentlemen in offices, and none of it seems entirely real until a man in a leather apron licks his thumb, rubs out a number, and writes a better one on your mother's clock. Honora stood at the foot of her own front steps, a composed, straight-backed woman, with dark auburn hair pinned plainly and steady hazel eyes, in a plain grey stuff gown, and she did not weep, because she had understood by then that weeping would be reported in 4 parishes by Sunday. The auctioneer worked through the lots in a cheerful shout. The clock went for 11 shillings, to a corn factor from the town who would not look at her. A woman she had known the whole of her life pressed her hand, said how dreadfully sorry they all were, and went back across the lawn to see whether the linen might go cheap. At a little after 11, a travelling carriage came along the upper road, moving at a good pace behind 4 horses, and the whole lawn turned to look at it the way a field of sheep turns. It slowed at the gate. It did not come in. Marcus, Duke of Wexcombe, a tall, black-haired man with a hard, handsome, high-boned face, in a dark blue superfine tailcoat and a plain white cravat, put down the glass and looked out at the lawn full of furniture for perhaps the space of 4 breaths. His steward came up to the carriage door at a trot with his hat in his hand, Gideon Crail, a heavy, soft-footed man with pale eyes and a careful smile, in a snuff-brown coat and top boots. "Is it done, Crail?" "It is done, Your Grace. Possession was taken on Tuesday. The proceeds will not cover the whole of the principal, but the land comes to us clear, and that was the object." "Then we need not stop," the Duke said. That was all of it. 2 questions and an answer, spoken across 40 yards of wet grass in a carrying voice that had never in its life needed to be raised, and the carriage went on up the road towards the good gravel of his own drive. He did not ask whose furniture stood out in the rain, or who the straight-backed woman on the steps might be. He had not read her name on the paper he signed, and he did not learn it that day, and by the time his horses reached the lodge gates, he had stopped thinking about Amberley Grange altogether, because a man came out to tell him the Italian had arrived about the staircase. Inside the carriage his aunt was watching him. Lady Augusta Merrick was a small, upright dowager with white hair under a lace cap and a blackthorn walking cane, in dove grey silk, and she had buried 2 husbands and was afraid of nothing on this earth, least of all a nephew. "You have done a wicked thing this morning, Marcus," she said. "I have closed an account that ought to have been closed by the last man who held it. You have put a gentlewoman out of her father's house to straighten a boundary. I have put an insolvent estate out of its misery. Do not be sentimental, aunt, It is a piece of business, and it is finished. He was wrong about that, though it took years for anybody to prove it to him. It was not finished. It was only beginning, and it would come back along that same road to him, exactly as it had gone out, paper by paper and signature by signature, until he stood in his own hall with the county on his steps and chalk numbers on his own furniture, and nothing left to spend but the single coin his pride had never once been asked for. He would learn her name then, and say it aloud before every person whose good opinion he had ever valued, and he would have to ask. To understand how it came about, one must go back a little further than that wet morning, to the slow and unremarkable way in which an old family loses a house. The Selbys had held Amberley Grange for 200 years, and had never been grand. They were the sort of gentry who kept 1,100 acres and a pack of indifferent hounds, dined with the parson, were bowed to in the market town, and had never been of the smallest consequence to anybody in London. Edmund Selby was the last of them, a kind, unbusinesslike man, with an open hand and no head at all for figures, and Honora was his only surviving relation. She had been reared to keep his house and to love the place, which she did in the wordless way one loves a thing one has never been apart from. The lime avenue, the sound of the west door sticking in wet weather, the particular smell of the passage by the still room in August. Nobody taught her anything whatever about money. That was for the men of business. When her father was pressed by a bad harvest, he did what his own father had done before him, went to a country attorney, borrowed on the security of the land, signed a mortgage, came home relieved, and never mentioned it again. When the drainage wanted doing, he borrowed a second time when the roof of the west wing came in. A third. Half the gentlemen in England lived exactly so. But paper does not stay where a gentleman leaves it. A mortgage may be sold, and assigned and sold again quietly, from one office to another, without anybody troubling to inform the man asleep in the house it is written upon. Edmund Selby died in his own bed, believing he owed money to a decent attorney in the market town, who had known him 30 years. He did not. Honora discovered it 8 days after the funeral, in the cold of the estate room, with the tin deed box open before her and everything inside it tied up in pink tape. The attorney explained it twice, because the first time she did not believe him. The whole of her father's paper, 3 mortgages, the arrears of interest, 2 bonds and a bill, had been bought up in one parcel 11 months earlier by an agent acting for a purchaser not named in the assignment. Bought by whom? That, Miss Selby, is precisely what they take care you shall not be told. But I can tell you the effect of it. Whoever holds these securities may call in the entire sum at his pleasure, and your father's death has made the whole of it payable. There is no interest owing that is not paid to the day, and no reasonable man would disturb you. I must beg you to understand that it does not follow that you are safe. The purchaser was, of course, the Duke of Wexcombe, and the reason had nothing to do with Honora Selby, or her father, or the 1,100 acres. It was the river. Wexcombe Abbey lay 2 miles to the north, and the Duke had come into the title early, and had conceived a scheme for the improvement of the park, a new sheet of water, a drive of 1.5 miles, a wall to carry the boundary round, and, at the heart of it, a great staircase of Italian marble, built into the south front, for which a man had been fetched from Rome. Amberley's water meadows lay directly in the way of it. Crail had found the mortgages, bought the assignment cheap, and waited, as he waited upon a dozen other small properties, for a death. The Duke signed the order to call it in on a Tuesday afternoon in the estate room at the Abbey, between a paper about the sale of some timber and a paper about the price of marble. He did not read the sheet through. He asked one question, whether it would answer, and Crail said that it would answer, and the Duke wrote the name he had written 10,000 times in that careless running hand of his, and turned to the marble, which interested him a great deal more. He had never in his life wanted a thing he could not have by writing that name upon a sheet of paper, and it had not yet occurred to him that this was a defect in his education. The demand came to Amberley in a letter, and gave her a fortnight. She did what could be done, which was very little. She wrote to her father's bankers, and was answered in 3 lines. She sat 4 hours in an outer office in the county town to be told, with regret, that upon the security offered no advance could be made to a woman without a trustee. She offered to sell the timber, the stock, the plate and the furniture, everything but the roof and the walls, and to remain as tenant at whatever rent the holder pleased to name. Crail answered on the 12th day. It was not the object of his principal to receive a rent. It was the object of his principal to have possession, and possession would be taken on the Tuesday following. She was permitted to keep her clothes, her mother's writing desk, and such books as the auctioneer thought not worth a lot. Everything else was numbered. She walked out at the west door for the last time at 4 in the afternoon, with one trunk following her on a handcart, out at her own gate, and away along the turnpike towards the town, and it rained on her the whole of the 3 miles. She stopped once at the milestone that marked the parish boundary, set her hand flat upon the cold wet stone, stood a while, and then went on. She was not weeping. She had gone past weeping. What she felt with the water running off the brim of her bonnet was something colder and a great deal more useful, and it had a shape to it, and the shape was this. Somebody bought that paper. A house can be taken from you with 1 sheet and 1 signature, and it is finished in an afternoon, and the man who does it need not even stop his carriage. Very well, she thought. Then paper is the thing worth knowing about. She had £800 in the world, and she had it only by an accident of law. It was a legacy from her godmother, left to her separately, and paid out of a separate estate, and because it had never been her father's, it had never been caught in the net with everything else. The executor sent it to her at her lodging over a stationer's shop in the market town, with a kind letter. She sat with the draft in her hand a long while, and then wrote to London. Mr. Josiah Meade had been her father's man of business in town for 20 years, a spare, stooped man with cropped grey hair and ink-stained fingers, in a rusty black coat, and he had written to her after the funeral in terms she thought merely polite, until she came to know him. He had not been polite. He had been ashamed. He had warned Edmund Selby about the 3rd mortgage in writing 3 times, had been thanked warmly and ignored entirely, and had then watched from 140 miles away, while a parcel of country paper was bought up over a dead man's head, and used to take a house. He received her in a room off a narrow court behind Cornhill, where the windows had not been washed in a decade, and the light came in the colour of weak tea. And he began, with great awkwardness, to speak of a subscription, among her father's old friends. "I have not come for charity, Mr. Meade," Honora said. "I have come for a place. I can write a fair hand, I can keep a household book that balances to a farthing, and I have £800. I am told that in your business £800 is a joke. I should like to know precisely how large a joke, and how long it takes to stop being one." Meade looked at her over his spectacles for a while. Then he got up, cleared a stool of ledgers, set it at the end of the long desk, and said that the hours were 8 until 7, that he could not pay her what he paid his clerk, and that if she ever wept in his office he would put her into the street himself. She took the stool and stayed at that desk 11 years. What she learned there she learned quickly, because she had a bitter and personal reason to attend. Meade's trade was paper, the buying and selling of other men's obligations. Bills discounted at 3 months, annuities granted by gentlemen upon their own lives at rates that would frighten a moneylender, post-obit bonds, by which an heir sells for £200 today what will cost his estate 1,000 when somebody dies. Reversions, judgments, renewals, the patient machinery by which the debts of great men are shaved and passed from hand to hand at a discount, like coin worn thin. "Fix one thing in your head and never let go of it," Meade told her in the first month. "Nothing in this trade is ever destroyed. It is only assigned. A mortgage is not extinguished when a house is taken. It is entered up and closed, and the paper goes into a box, and that box has an owner, and the owner may be found. Men in a hurry believe their paper vanishes behind them. It does not. It goes on ahead of them and waits." He meant it as a lesson in the trade. She took it as something else. She had a gift for it, which surprised nobody more than herself. She had spent her life keeping a household book that balanced, and a great estate turned out to be only a household book with more noughts and worse manners. Within a year she was doing Meade's correspondence. Within 3 she was valuing annuities on her own account, and was right rather more often than he was. She had the 2 qualities the trade rewards and almost nobody possesses together. She was patient past all reason, and she was without any appetite whatever for a quick profit. She bought what she meant to keep, paid a fair price for it, and never haggled a distressed man down to his last shilling, not out of tenderness, but because a man squeezed once will hide from you afterwards, and she wanted them coming back. Above all, she never once put her own name to anything. Everything was bought by Meade and Company on the account of a client who was not named. It began as delicacy, because a woman in that trade is a curiosity, and a curiosity is remembered. It ended as strategy. Meanwhile, 2 miles north of a shuttered house in the country, the Duke of Wexcombe was spending money in the grand manner. He built. That was the beginning of it, and very nearly the end of it. He made his sheet of water and drowned 40 acres to do it, and carried his wall round the whole boundary in cut stone, because brick, his architect told him, would not do for such a prospect. The marble came from Italy by sea and canal and road, in crates the size of coffins. The great staircase rose in the south front. The man from Rome was paid £2,000 and went home. Then the money stopped, quite suddenly in the way it does, and the staircase stopped with it. The lower flight finished and shining, the upper flights raw brick and bare stone, with the rest of the marble stacked in the orangery under sacking, waiting for a payment that never came. He did not stop. Men in that condition never do. He kept a racing stud that ate an income and won nothing, contested the borough twice, and paid for it twice, and subscribed £4,000 to a canal that was cut for 11 miles and abandoned in a wet meadow. The calls upon those shares following him for years like a dog, and when the rents would not answer, he did what such men do, granted annuities upon his own life at rates that made the grantors laugh in their offices, signed bonds and post-obit securities against everything not tied up by the entail, and let Crail renew and renew. At a commission Crail took from both ends and entered nowhere. None of this made the smallest difference to how the Duke of Wexcombe was received. He was bowed to at the assemblies, and his health was drunk at the audit dinner. And if he had been asked in those years whether he was a ruined man, he would have said, with perfect honesty, that his affairs were in some temporary disorder which Crail was arranging. His paper went out into the world. It went to the annuitants, and from them to the discount houses when they wanted their money sooner, and from the discount houses into the market at 80, and then at 70, and then, in a bad autumn, at 51, and one wet afternoon a parcel of it came across a desk in a narrow court behind Cornhill, and Honora Selby untied the tape, and turned up the first sheet, and saw the name written, across the foot of it, in a careless running hand. She sat quite still for as long as it takes a clock to strike 4. "You are white as that paper," said Meade, from his end of the desk. "I know this hand. I have seen it once before. It was on the order that took my father's house." She smoothed the sheet flat with the side of her palm twice, the way one smooths a cloth. "What is asked for this parcel?" 51. "And they will take 49. It is bad paper on a bad life, and everybody in the court knows it. Buy it at 51. I will not have it said we beat them down and got it cheap. And Mr. Meade, when the rest of it comes, and it will come, buy that too." That was the beginning of the quietest campaign ever conducted in England. She did not hurry, and never once made a stir in the market that might set a price rising. She bought his paper as a patient collector buys pictures, whatever came, whenever it came, always through other hands, always at the price asked, never in her own name. Annuities from men grown tired of waiting for a duke to die. Bonds from a wine merchant, a coach builder, a jeweler, a bank in Bath. The canal calls. The judgment obtained by a tailor and never enforced. 2 of the 3 mortgages upon the unentailed lands, and then, in a slow goods season, the 3rd and largest, which carried with it a charge upon the abbey itself and everything in it. She kept the whole of it in a japanned tin box with a lock, because that was the kind of box her father's paper had lain in, and every quarter she added to it, until it grew too heavy to lift, and Meade had a 2nd box made. And on a foggy evening in the 11th year, with the fire nearly out, Josiah Meade laid a fair copy of the complete schedule before her and put his hands flat on either side of it. "That is the whole of it," he said. "Every claim in England against Marcus, Duke of Wexcombe, is held by one party, and the one party is you. He owes his shoemaker. He owes nobody else on this earth but you." She read it down, line by line, in the way she had learned to read, which is to say slowly and twice. And near the bottom of the 2nd sheet, in the schedule of securities taken with the 3rd mortgage, entered among the outlying properties as an unimproved holding of 1,100 acres with a dwelling house out of repair, she found Amberley Grange. She sat for a moment, without breathing. The park had never been improved. The money had gone into marble and horses and a canal in a wet meadow. The drive was never cut. The sheet of water stopped at the boundary, and the water meadows he had ruined her to obtain had been let to a grazier for £80 a year. The house itself he had shut up. It had stood 11 winters with the shutters barred and the lime avenue unpruned, and when he wanted money for the staircase he had charged it, along with everything else, on a schedule he certainly never read. And it had come down through 11 years of assignments and renewals into a tin box in a narrow court behind Cornhill. She had bought her father's house back without knowing she was doing it. She had paid for it twice, and the second time she had paid the man who took it. There was one thing more in the parcel, and Meade set it before her with unusual gentleness: the old estate day books from Wexcombe, obtained from a discharged under-agent as vouchers to prove the title. She turned to the month, and to the Tuesday. There it stood in Crale's clean clerkly hand, one line, 9th, from the top of the page. Amberley Selby Mortgage called in. Account closed. Above it and below it, in the same hand and the same ink, ran 4 full lines upon the price of Carrara marble, the freight of it from the coast, and the damage to 1 crate in the unloading, which was thought a great misfortune. Meade waited, his hand still flat upon the schedule. You may do anything you please with him now. Hold it quietly and take your interest, and he need never know your name, or bring it down upon him at once, and it will be public, and it will not be pretty. I do not want it pretty, Honora said, and closed the daybook. Every instrument is to be presented for payment on the same morning. Every one in the ordinary way, through the ordinary officers, with no warning and no discourtesy, and not 1 hour's grace beyond what the law allows any man. He shall have exactly what my father's estate was given. He shall have a fortnight. The reckoning fell upon Wexcombe Abbey on a Monday. By the Wednesday, Gideon Crale had gone across to Boulogne with the estate cash box and 11 years of unentered commissions, and by the Friday the Duke was sitting in his own estate room with his solicitor from London opposite him, a bundle of notices between them, and the light coming grey off the wet park. How much of it? The Duke said. The whole, your grace. The annuities, the bonds, the canal calls, all 3 mortgages upon the unentailed lands, and the charge upon the abbey with its contents. It is not a run upon you. It is one holder who has bought everything and has come in all at once. One holder. He set his hands very carefully upon the table. Then I shall deal with one man. Who is he? Do not tell me it is a house in the city. Behind the house there is a man. Name him. The solicitor turned over a paper he plainly wished he had not brought. The purchases are made by Meade and Company on the account of a principal, and the principal, since your grace insists, is a lady, a Miss Honora Selby. Nothing whatever happened in the Duke's face, and that was the worst of it, because there was nothing there to happen. The name came into the room and meant no more to him than a name in a newspaper. Selby, he said at last. I do not know any Selbys. It was his aunt who told him. Lady Augusta came over from the Dower House, sat down opposite her nephew with both hands on her blackthorn cane, and did not spare him 1 syllable. You know her. You saw her once. She stood at the foot of her own front steps in a grey gown, with her father 3 weeks in his grave, and the whole county walking about on her lawn among her mother's furniture, and you slowed at the gate and asked Crail whether it was done, and Crail said it was done, and you said that we need not stop. And we drove on. I was in the carriage with you. I told you that morning you had done a wicked thing. You told me it was a piece of business and it was finished. The Duke sat perfectly still a long moment. The water meadows, he said. The water meadows, which you never drained, and never drove your road through, and let to a grazier for £80 a year, and forgot. And the house, Marcus, you shut the house. It has stood dark on that hill 11 winters, 2 miles from your own bed, and I do not believe you have once ridden over to look at it. He rode over that afternoon, alone in the rain. He stopped at the milestone at the parish boundary without knowing why the stone should catch his eye, and then went on up the lime avenue, untouched in 11 years, and closed overhead into a dark tunnel. The shutters were barred. The west door had swollen in the wet and would not open above a hand's breadth, and he put his eye to the gap and saw an empty hall with the paper hanging off the wall in tongues. Rain coming through where the lead had gone, and the marks on the floorboards where furniture had stood 200 years. He rode home, went up his own great staircase, the lower flight of Carrara marble polished like water, the upper flights raw brick and bare stone, and sent for the old day books to find out what he had done, and was told they had been sold with the vouchers 2 years since, in an economy, by a man who was now in France. The sale at Wexcombe Abbey was advertised on the Abbey's own door, and cried in the market town for a fortnight beforehand, and on the appointed morning the whole county came out to see it done. They came in gigs and farm carts, and on foot along the lane, and stood about on the wet grass under the south front, and watched the officers carry the house out of doors piece by piece, and set it down in rows upon the turf, and every article had a number chalked upon it. 62 on a cabinet out of France, 63 on the Duke's own writing table. He did not go abroad, and he did not shut himself upstairs. He came out and stood at the top of his own steps, a tall black-haired man, with a hard, handsome, high-boned face, in a dark blue superfine tailcoat, and a plain white cravat, bare-headed in the drizzle, and received the county as it arrived, and it was afterwards agreed on all sides that it was the first entirely decent thing he had ever been known to do. At a little after 11, a plain travelling carriage came along the upper road and slowed at the gate, and the whole lawn turned to look at it the way a field of sheep turns. It did not go on. It came in. Honora Selby got down at the foot of the steps in a gown of deep emerald green silk, the one saturated note of colour in all that grey wet morning. Josiah Meade behind her, with a japanned tin box in both arms. She went up to the Duke of Wexcombe, and the county went so quiet that the rooks could be heard in the beeches. "Your Grace," she said, "you will not know me. My name is Honora Selby. My father was Edmund Selby of Amberley Grange." Something went out of his face then, and something else came into it, and the men nearest described it afterwards in the same words, as though a man walking in the dark had put his hand on a wall he did not know was there, and understood all at once exactly how far he had come, and in which direction. "Stop the sale," he said to the officers, and nobody moved, and the auctioneer on his stand did not look at the Duke at all. He looked past him, at her. That was the moment the county understood. "Stop the sale," said Honora, and it stopped. They went into the great hall, And because the doors stood open, half the county came in after them, and stood about the walls under the raw brick of the unfinished staircase. And there the Duke of Wexcombe did the one thing he had never done in his life. "I took your father's house," he said. "I bought his mortgages over his head while he lived, and when he died I called in the whole of the money, knowing it could not be paid, because I wanted 1,100 acres of water meadow for a drive I never cut and a lake I never finished. I did not read your name. I have been told what I said at your gate, and I do not deny a word of it. I put you out on the road in front of these same people, and I did not stop the carriage, and I never thought of it again." He was silent a moment. "There is nothing I can offer that is not already yours. I can only ask your pardon, and I ask it where they can all hear me." And the Duke of Wexcombe went down on one knee upon his own cold marble, and stayed there. Honora let him stay a moment. Then she took a book out of Meade's box, an old estate day book bound in vellum, and opened it at a mark, and held it down to him. "Read the 9th line, if you please." Aloud, he took it in both hands. His voice was not steady, and he did not attempt to make it so. Amberley Selby Mortgage called in, account closed, and the 4 lines under it. He read them, the price of Carrara marble, the freight of it from the coast, and the damage to one crate in the unloading, which was thought a great misfortune. Somewhere at the back of the hall a woman made a small sound. He shut the book and knelt there holding it. "Get up, Your Grace," Honora said. "I have not come to take your house. If I wanted your house, I need only have stayed at my desk and said nothing, and it would have fallen into my hands at my Kelmis without my troubling to put on my gown. I have come to tell you the terms upon which you may keep it." She named them there, in the hall, before witnesses, in the level voice of a woman who had done the arithmetic 11 years before, and had merely been waiting for the day he should remain at Wexcombe Abbey for his life, as tenant at a rent, with the management of the estates vested in her house of business, and an allowance paid him quarterly like any other servant of the property. The stud, the pictures, the town house, and the plate to be sold within the year, and every annuitant, bondholder, and tradesman on his books, paid in full, paid by his own hand, into their hands, in their own parlours, with his hat off. The great staircase to stand exactly as it was, raw brick and bare stone, until the last of those men was paid, and he to go up it and down it every day of his life. And Amberley Grange passed out of the schedule altogether, and was hers, absolutely, and he was not to set foot upon it unless he was asked. "Do you agree to it?" "I agree to all of it," said the Duke. "Then you may have your furniture back," she said, "and I will thank somebody to fetch a wet cloth for that chalk." He kept every word of it, which was the part nobody expected, least of all his aunt. The stud went in the spring and the pictures in the autumn. He learned his own rent roll by heart, having reached 43 without once having read it. He stood in a coach builder's parlour in Bath, with his hat in his hand, and counted out £412, and did the same in a wine merchant's office, and a jeweller's, and 11 farmhouses, and once in the back room of a shop where an annuitant's widow made him drink tea and tell her the whole of it, which he did. He went up and down the raw brick stair every day for 4 years, and the county, which had watched him do the worst thing it had ever seen a man do, watched him do that too, and changed its mind with the enormous slowness of counties. At Amberley the shutters came down, the limes were pruned, the lead made good, The west door eased so that it opened, and a corn factor's widow was persuaded to part with a tall clock for a great deal more than 11 shillings. Honora had it set in the hall where it had always stood, and wound it and listened to it strike. He came on a wet evening in the 4th year on foot from the milestone, with the receipted bonds of the last 3 annuitants in his coat, and the rain running off him. He did not send in his name. He knocked at the west door and waited on the step to be admitted, like any man come to a house where he is not certain of his welcome, and he was standing there still when she opened it herself. "You could have sent those," Honora said. "I could. It is 3 miles in the rain." "It is," said the Duke of Wexcombe, "and I am told it is a great deal worse when one is carrying a trunk." She looked at him a long moment in the light of the hall, with her mother's clock ticking behind her and the smell of the passage by the still room coming up the way it did in August. And whatever she had been weighing all that autumn, she finished weighing it then. "Come in out of the rain, Your Grace," she said, and stood back from her own door and let him in. He came in, and whatever was agreed between them afterwards, and a good deal was, in time, and the county talked of nothing else for a 12-month, it was agreed at her table, in her house, in her time, and every word of it upon her terms.